Welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business, in our fourth video of Module 8. And today we are dealing with the topic of emotional intelligence. So let's climb right in. Let me propose a scenario to you for us to consider. There is an acronym in the modern business world that refers to a small host of very high-performing companies, most of which we are all very, very aware of. And as you can see from the slide, that acronym is FAANG, F-A-A-N-G, an acronym which refers to, as you can see there, the companies Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, or Alphabet, Google's now parent company. And the reason that we talk about the FAANG companies is because they demonstrate the highest levels of performance, growth, disruptive innovation, creating new markets in this new contemporary web and cloud-based economy. So let's just for a moment pretend that one of these companies announces they need a new chief technology officer, someone who is going to be able to lead the technical initiatives, execute on the technical strategy of one of these very high-performing, very high-flying, technically based companies. In fact, they announced they've already developed a short list of 3 prime candidates for this new role. If this slide illustrates those 3 potential candidates, and you can see there, the gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, he actually is someone who is working for one of the FAANG companies in a role of technical division leadership. Or the woman on the far right, they're holding the tablet, or one of the gentlemen sitting there, perhaps the one in the blue shirt in the lower left-hand corner. Let's say that those are the 3 candidates, the short list, the hot list, up for this new coveted role, this very special, very influential, very powerful, and of course, very highly compensated role as the new chief technology officer of one of the FAANG companies. Here's the question I want to ask you. Does anyone listening to this, does anyone watching this video believe that any of these 3 candidates lacks the sufficient technical skills, the sufficient hard skills called for by the role of the Chief Technology Officer? Does anyone think that one of these 3 candidates doesn't have the technical skills to pull the role off? And the answer is, of course, absolutely not. Because the truth of the matter is, you don't make it to the short list of the top 3 candidates for a role like that unless you already have a long track record, a resume, a proven history, a reputation for being able to execute and have the key strategic, technical, hard skills for a role like that. You know that all 3 of these candidates have the hard skills. So let me ask a question. What's going to make the difference between these 3 candidates? What is it that separates the winner from the also-rans in this short list of candidates? And the answer is, of course, soft skills. The ability to lead and motivate and unite and compel talented human beings to work alongside, to be enlisted in the vision, to move together as a team. Those are the kinds of things that the key candidate will have in greater and more effective measure than the other candidates on the short list. That's what we want to talk about today when we bring up the topic of emotional intelligence. And so you can see from this slide, we begin by defining emotional intelligence as the extent to which people are self-aware, can manage their emotions, can motivate themselves, can express empathy for others, and possess social skills. Just from the outset, before we even go to any of the next slides, you can understand how having those kinds of qualities, what we aggregate together as EQ, or emotional intelligence, which is a term that was coined by Daniel Goleman, who has made an entire career out of writing and researching on this topic of emotional intelligence. How that component, as a defining characteristic, as an aggregate we look at as your soft skills, how that could make you more effective as a leader of women and men. That's how important emotional intelligence is for the leader in the leadership role. Well, these 5 components, let's talk about them a little bit. Here you see the first 2 components of emotional intelligence. The first is self-awareness, defined as a person's capacity for being aware of how they themselves are feeling. And of course, one of the components of that is not only being aware of how they're feeling, but also being aware how that impacts your behavior and what kind of responses you get from the people around you. The second component there, managing emotions, a person's capacities to balance anxiety, fear, and anger, and quite frankly, other negative emotions, so that they do not overly interfere with getting things accomplished. The ability to not only recognize and be aware, but to regulate and manage those kinds of emotions and their precipitant responses, the way you behave as a result of the way you feel, so they don't overly interfere with your role of executing and getting things accomplished. Those are the first 2. Let's look at the last 3. The third component of emotional intelligence, the ability to motivate oneself. A person's ability to remain optimistic and to continue striving in the face of setbacks, barriers, and perhaps even intermittent or intermediate failure. The fourth component of emotional intelligence is empathy. A person's ability to understand how others are feeling, even without being explicitly told how they are feeling. And you can understand then how empathy would actually embrace a whole set of different sensitivities and characteristics and abilities, including not only the natural capacity to want to enter into another person's feelings, but also the perception and the sensitivity to pick up on those kinds of things non-verbally, from body language, from others' behavior, from others' perhaps facial expressions and gestures, and to be able to pick up on those kinds of things. And you can see there, empathy actually embraces a whole set of skills and abilities. Finally, the fifth component of emotional intelligence, you see there, social skills. A person's ability to get along with others and to establish positive relationships. In that sense, social skills is not simply one set of skills. It's a whole arsenal of skills with a view towards the long run of not simply getting along with someone else in the moment, but getting along towards the end of building and establishing a relationship with that person, a positive relationship with that person, nurturing it, cultivating it, etc., etc. Let's take a look at each of these components then beyond their mere definition. Self-awareness, our first component. The definition, you see there in the second column, knowing one's emotions, strengths, weaknesses, drives, values, and goals, and their impact on others around them. When someone has a high degree of self-awareness, you can see some of the hallmarks, some of the net aggregate reputation and habitual behavior that comes from someone with great and high degrees of self-awareness. They have self-confidence. They have a realistic self-assessment, neither too low nor too high. They often demonstrate a self-deprecating sense of humor. They're able to willingly laugh at themselves, knowing that that does not threaten their own self-esteem or their image of themselves. And they have an actual thirst for constructive criticism. They appreciate someone telling them how they can be even better the next time. What's an example of demonstrating self-awareness? You see one right in that fourth column. You know tight deadlines bring out the worst in you, so you plan well in advance in order to minimize this impact on others on your team. And you can see how within the perspective of emotional intelligence, it's not simply being disciplined with your time just to get things done, but it's even further than that, is being disciplined with your time because you know from experience how tight deadlines affect your emotionality, your habitual responses, and in order to keep things positive with others around you, you are thoughtful and self-aware enough to watch yourself and how those things will affect others on your work team. That's one way to look at, then, this first component of self-awareness. The second, self-regulation, controlling or redirecting disruptive emotions and impulses, being able to manage one's own emotions. You can see there the hallmark behaviors of someone with high degrees of self-regulation: trustworthiness, integrity, comfort with ambiguity and change. How does that actually result? Because you are able to control and redirect disruptive and negative emotions and impulses. Well, there's an example there in the fourth column. When your team botches a presentation, you resist the urge to scream and respond with negativity. Instead, you consider possible reasons for the failure, explain the actual, real-time, practical consequences to your team, and begin to explore solutions with them. And you can see there, the example that I've provided is not ignoring that something negative happened, and it's certainly not trying to pretend as if everything is rosy. You're dealing with the facts head on, but in such a way that it not only rectifies the problem, but might provide alternative solutions and, in the long run, builds your team up rather than tears them down. Third component of being able to be self-motivating, and you see there the definition, being driven to achieve for the sake of achievement. Some of the hallmarks of that in a person's life over time: someone who is highly motivated, highly self-motivated. There is a passion for the work itself and for new challenges. There is unflagging energy to improve, and there is optimism in the face of failure. An example there, you see there in the fourth column, you see the investment portfolio that you manage at your investment firm. You see it tumble for 3 consecutive quarters. Major clients begin to defect. Instead, your response, instead of blaming the external circumstances, how the economy is working against you, how these clients never trusted you to begin with, instead, you commit to learn from the experience and engineer a turnaround in the portfolio that you're managing. The fourth component of emotional intelligence, empathy. You can see there the definition: considering others' feelings, especially when making decisions. What are some of the hallmarks of that? When there's a high degree of empathy developed over time, there's expertise in attracting and retaining talent, the ability to develop others around you, sensitivity to cross-cultural differences. In the example I provided there, interpreting a Japanese client's silence as disapproval, the project team prepares to leave, but you read the client's body language, you sense there is still remaining interest, and you keep the meeting going to the client's eventual satisfaction. That's just one of, well, thousands of possible examples I can provide, and you can see the point there. The ability to very directly and intuitively be sensitive to, interpret, comprehend, and act upon other people's feelings. That's the fourth component of emotional intelligence. Here's the fifth one: social skill. Managing relationships to move people in desired directions. Now, right at face value, I want to stop there for a moment, because you may read that definition and say to yourself, that sounds really manipulative. To move people in desired directions. And what I would tell you right off the bat is you need to understand this is exactly what great leaders are able to do on a regular basis. This is what separates nominal average leaders from great leaders, is the ability to manage relationships to move people in desired directions. That's perhaps the very definition of great leadership. What does it lead to? You can see some of the hallmarks there. effectiveness in leading change, persuasiveness, extensive networking, expertise in building and leading teams. You see the example in the fourth column. In order to adopt a large strategy change, you enlist the support from kindred minds, other managers, other influencers, and you persuade adoption across key influencers in the firm. That then is our brief overview of these 5 components of emotional intelligence. What's the good news? Well, the good news is, well, if you compare EQ, emotional intelligence, to IQ, intelligence quotient, behavioral psychologists will pretty much tell us that IQ is fairly fixed at birth. It becomes a capacity that doesn't change that much over time. IQ, relatively fixed. However, with EQ, that is not true. EQ is a capacity that can be grown and cultivated over time. And that is great news, because if you look at these 5 components of emotional intelligence, and if you honestly think about yourself, sort of look in the mirror, conceptually, mentally, and you realize, hey, I'm good at a couple of those, but those last 3, man, I'm really not good at those areas of emotional intelligence. Hey, you can get better. You can recognize them, you can identify where you need to get better, and you can commit to growth. Now, I got to be honest with you. If you're the type of person who looks at those 5 components of emotional intelligence, you say, man, I got those all nailed, then I would simply tell you, hey, you know what? Most of us still have areas we need to grow in. Maybe you ought to chat with your moms, because your moms will always tell you the truth. And she may sit you down and say, you know what, honey? When it comes to self-motivation, you're great. But in terms of being empathetic with people, man, you have a long way to grow. Your mom should be honest with you. You know what I'm talking about? Talk to someone who really knows you well and ask them, where is the first place I should start to try and grow and become a better version of myself, to improve my capacity along these 5 areas of emotional intelligence? It'll be unique to you and probably different from those around you. But the great news is you can grow and mature when it comes to emotional intelligence. You can be better tomorrow if you commit to change today. Where does all this lead? Well, for those of us who have continued to grow and can demonstrate higher and higher levels of emotional intelligence in our leadership, then you can be the kind of leader that not only is able to execute and get things done on behalf of your team and behalf of your organization, but you will be the kind of leader, the great kind of leader, that lifts those around you up as well. You will be the kind of leader over time who makes everyone on your team better. And that's really what leadership is about. I hope you have appreciated the importance of some of these components of emotional intelligence, and we'll see you in the next lecture.